Welcome to the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. I'm Sheng Peng, editor-in-chief of San Jose Hockey Now. You can also find my work at MEC Sharks and on Twitter at Sheng_Peng.
And I'm Keegan McNally. You can find me on Twitter at halfwall_hockey, at my website, half-wallhockey.com, or at San Jose Hockey Now. Sheng, this week, what's our headliner?
We're talking pretty much all Barracuda this episode. Of course, the AHL All-Star game is headed to San Jose this Sunday and Monday. I'll be there. Anyway, so I want to get into a conversation that or question that we've been asked by a lot of people over the last couple of months. Basically, why are the Barracuda so bad?
Yeah,
the Barracuda, like the Sharks, are in last place in their respective divisions, and I think that more was expected of the Barracuda. I think, though, one of the problems that when we get into how good your AHL team should be is that most people don't really know how good the other teams are. There just isn't a sort of that kind of way to compare. It's not easy to compare. And so I try to get into what the expectations should have been for this Barracuda team competitively. And I couldn't think of anybody better to talk to about this with Patrick Williams, and he covers the AHL for NHL and AHL.com. So nobody better out there in terms of having a league-wide perspective of the AHL, which I think is really important here. So it's not just, hey, the Barracuda have Radim Šimić, Oscar Lindblom, they have some NHL guys, Ryan Carpenter or whatever, right? They should be good. No, I got to compare it to the rest of the division and the rest of the division, what they've got in terms of AHL veteran talent and also prospects too. And so anyway, I have a great conversation with Patrick. Also too, I talked with a bunch of other people, scouts, executives, that sort of thing, about the Barracuda and just sort of how they see where the Barracuda should be. So we're going to get to that all right now.
Yeah. We're gonna do a little bit of talk before that. We're gonna talk about Sharks' play since the Seattle game. We're gonna talk about Eklund being moved to center for a game or two. Mukhamadullin's NHL play since he was called up. Also, the reason why I'm wearing a jersey this week because I was so excited that Mukhamadulin got called up, despite anything else that happened with the Sharks. A little bit about the AHL All-Star news, including Gushchin and Mukhamadullin. We're also going to talk about Hertl and a quote that came out about a possible discussion he's going to have in the summer about whether or not he's going to move on from the Sharks or stay.
Well, just discuss the future, the Sharks' plan. So
we'll get into
summer
it.
with my career.
Then we'll have our interview with Patrick, and then finally we are going to do a little bit of a wrap up after the interview, just to kind of talk about what we heard from him and then what you've heard from other people about the Barracuda.
Some big picture thoughts about the Barracuda.
Very excited. It was a great interview with Patrick, so stick around for that for sure. He had so much knowledge that, people don't realize because it's easy to just follow the NHL and the superstars in the NHL, but not many people know what the real stars are, who the real stars are in the AHL, and he does, and what makes a good team. So great interview. We'll talk about it later on. All right. Sharks are no longer in last place in the Tankathon standings.
They're too good, goddammit.
They're too good. They are world beaters at this point. I'm so upset. No, it's fine. I think the team was, inevitably gonna start winning. Just a little bit of a bounce up that's been happening. And that's
healthier, weaker schedule too.
Weaker schedule for sure. Playing a lot of bottom feeder teams. But an interesting thing, we, not me and you, but the Sharks have been trying Eklund at center, which is a position he hasn't played since his
2021-22.
Yeah, since his draft plus 1 year in Sweden. I thought, again, I watched Eklund a lot in his draft plus 1 year, and
You were wrong.
I was wrong. Well, I wasn't. Back then, he didn't look good at center. Actually, the Sharks even came out and said, hey, we fucked up. We don't think he's a center either. We're going to put him back on the wing. That's where he's going to play.
What did they say that? Well, we can find out later. But
They said something like, we think he should go back to the wing or something similar to that based on his play.
If we go back to when Doug Jr. drafted Eklund, he said that we see him as a center eventually. So.
And then what do they do the next year after a disappointing year
eventually. So he actually compared him to, we'll talk about Hertl, but he actually compared him to Hertl because Hertl famously started his career on the wing.
No.
But the Sharks' plan was always to move Hertl to center eventually too.
Yeah, but I think
years there, right? So
For sure. There's two differences. One, Hertl is 4 inches taller than Eklund, and
Sure.
he's 40 pounds heavier than Eklund or
Hmm.
whatever. And he fits that mold of an NHL center a lot better than Eklund does traditionally. But I also think the style of play that Eklund was playing in Sweden is a little bit different. He's got the
Hmm.
puck a lot more when he's playing center right now than he did in Sweden. He was doing a lot more chip and chase, that kind of thing that wasn't really giving him a lot of space to actually maneuver with the puck, which
Sure.
is one of Eklund's best strengths. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I was wrong because I thought it wasn't going to go well, but it's only been a couple games, so maybe he'll go back to wing. Either way, I'm super pumped. Even if he does stick at center or not, he's still looking great. He's had a good run here for the last couple of games.
Yeah, he looked particularly good against Seattle. I don't think he was quite as strong against Anaheim, but that's going to happen. If he is as good consistently as he was against the Kraken at center, he's going to stay at
Hmm.
center. I
Yeah.
think. But of course, that consistency is a challenge for any young player at the NHL level. But what I really loved about him in the Seattle game was not just what he did with the puck and how he pushed
Hmm.
back the Kraken defense, and part of it, though, he did say was that the Kraken defense weren't very aggressive on him, so that might be just how the
True.
Kraken defend, and so he took advantage of that. Chiefly on the Mark Edward Vlasic goal, where he basically took on 5 Kraken and eventually got the puck to Ty Emerson, who got it to Vlasic.
Yep.
Noted goal scorer, Mark Edward Vlasic. But
Bobby
anyway,
Orr.
what I liked about Eklund though is just how conscientious he seemed defensively, how hard he tried on the back check. Not a perfect defensive center, of course. He's 21 years old, but
Of course.
if you look at that play, and I was going to clip it, I might write about it during this break, but if you remember, I think it was the third period, he had like this fancy spinorama,
Yeah.
right? Just the Eklund, patented Eklund
Oh, yeah.
spinorama.
Eklund
And
spinnies.
yeah,
Yeah.
the Eklund spinny and created a good chance for somebody there. But what I liked about that play wasn't that, because that kind of fancy stuff is great. But what he did after that play was he back checked hard.
Yep.
Whichever Kraken player claimed the puck there, Eklund back checked hard, and I think he took the puck back, or at least he made a really good effort, and at least made it hard for the Kraken player to exit cleanly. And you love to see that. And
Hmm.
speaking of sort of models for him, right? I think it's interesting that the Sharks have a pretty good model at center for a guy Eklund's size, for Eklund to emulate his game from. And the guy that really talks to about the game, even when though this guy is hurt, is Mikhail Granlund. Mikhail Granlund,
Yep.
I think, is 5'10, stockier and stronger than Eklund now, but Eklund is just 21, of course. So Eklund can maybe get there, right? And so that's a good model for a guy who is undersized, but has pretty much played center his entire career. And another thing I thought too is that if this is real, in terms of, again, just one game. And so if this is the best game that Eklund ever plays at center and the rest of the games are a drop off from here, then leave him at wing, right? But if Eklund can kind of continue this as a center, then really kind of changes the sort of calculus of his projection, kind of, right? In
Hmm.
terms of suddenly now we're talking about a top 6 future center, or at least a guy who is versatile, legitimately versatile, where you can slide him in either place and he's going to have an impact, and that
Yeah.
makes him that much more valuable.
Yeah, and actually, I remember looking at his face-off stats in Sweden during that D+1 year, and it was actually really good. Not that face-offs are
Hmm.
like anything that or only centers can do, or
Right.
even a mark of a good center, but it does. Coaches will like it better if they do have a good face-off man at
Sure.
center.
Yeah. If you could
So
pull off a 45% at NHL
yeah,
level,
he was like a
I'm not
he.
sure how he did,
I don't remember
but
the exact quote. I or exact number. I think he was near like 55 or 54, which is good,
in
and because he
Sweden.
was in Sweden.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's good. I mean, he
Okay.
definitely has a little bit of face-off talent there, at least at that time. I like it. I thought he looked great. I
Mhm.
just was very excited that he was able to hold on to the puck, and that's one thing that not a lot of Sharks can do. And like if you look at a couple of guys on the Sharks, they just don't have the ability to really hold on to the puck or maintain it against pressure. And Eklund
Mhm.
seemingly has started to really gain that skill. Like he's
When
had
he's
it
at his
forever.
best, yeah, when he's at his best, he's really hard. It's hard to take just against like I said, against the Kraken, really
Yep.
hard to to take the puck off of him, coming from the carrying it through the defensive zone and neutral zone.
Mhm.
When he was struggling, 10 or so games, that was a problem.
Yep.
He was getting the pucks checked off of his stick, checked off, and that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
when he's on his game, though, yeah, he might be the Sharks' best at that, except for Hertl.
Yeah,
In
boy,
terms of
Hertl.
that carrying ability, and
Mhm.
so yeah, it's very, very promising, and I wonder what they're gonna do. This is a different conversation, deeper conversation for later. But if the Sharks come out of the break healthy, which they project to be, uh, including Hertl and Granlund, and Couture and Sturm, you wonder where Eklund could slot in there. I think there is an
Mhm.
argument based on the first few games here that maybe Couture could use some time at wing to kind of get back to speed and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's just a thought. That would be what I might consider. But we'll see what they do.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough sell, right?
Mhm.
Because like Couture's coming back from injury, and he's been center for a long time now. It would be interesting. I mean, maybe he's all for it, and he's like, "Yeah, absolutely, put me on the wing and let's go."
I think while he gets back to speed, kind of, it's fine. I
Mhm.
think he could be open to it. I know they talked about it before he came back,
Yeah,
so it wasn't like it was ruled out. Like, oh, I've been a center my whole life. I'm not going to wing.
yeah,
Couture, yeah, he's not that. I don't think he's that kind of guy anyway. But Quinn said that those discussions that they had, and
yep,
Couture, I'm not putting any blame on his doorstep area. He's been gone for a long time. Um, 40 he missed 45 games, right, in all the training camps. So take some
yeah,
time to get up to speed. The wing might be a good idea to do it to get back up to speed while playing game action. It doesn't mean he's going to stay at wing for the whole year. It
hmm
could be 3 games, 5 games he's back at center. But just it's just a thought. It could
yeah. I mean,
even
it'd
be
be
Granlund because
yeah.
Granlund's played some wing too in recent years. But
I mean,
yeah.
I think an interesting line would be, Couture and Eklund on Eklund
Mhm.
being at center. We always, pencil in Eklund as like, oh, the winger on Couture's line or Hurdle's line
Right.
or whatever. But yeah, that's an interesting combo there because
Yeah.
you
Couture could
release a
really
lot of
protect.
the
Yeah.
yeah, release a lot of the pressure from Couture to cover if Eklund's able to carry the puck and back check and he seems to be playing with a lot of mojo and hustle,
Anyway, let's
some
not give
words.
away too much of that's a good future topic
Yeah. I
a
think
week or
it looked
two
good
from now.
though. I'm super excited. Hopefully they continue to prove me wrong and he's gonna stick at center because that helps the Sharks tremendously in the future.
Right. Right. Even just that versatility, right? Where like, okay, he's really good at wing, but he's also really good at center. So if we don't get
Yep.
a Celebrini, let's say Smith is also equally versatile, which he projects to be. So we have options for 1C and 2C with Smith and Eklund, but also too, if we get another center, we can also
Yep.
slide them onto wing. So that really does kind of help the projections of the franchise.
Get good players and they'll figure it out.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what Quinn said. So.
Yeah, basically. All right. Another young player, another exciting player that made his NHL debut this week. Shakir Mukhamadullin. I am so excited. That's my first part. And we'll talk in a second. He was also named to the AHL All-Star game,
Mhm.
but I think it was well deserved, and I really liked how the Sharks did it. They brought him up right before the break to give him a little taste to see what he's got.
Mhm.
Now they can kind of make the decision whether or not he should go back down or stay with the NHL. But they gave him a little bit before the break because I think that was well deserved, basically based on his play in the AHL so far, and he didn't look out of place mostly.
No, he did not.
I think the first game was a little rough, based on the replay. But the last two games, I've liked him.
Yeah, I thought again maybe see the Seattle game was his strongest, but I
Mhm.
liked him in the Anaheim game.
Sure.
I one thing I would say to sort of whet everybody's appetite is I've also talked with a lot of people outside of the Sharks organization about Mukhamadullin. The reason why I do this is, and I've said this a few times, that if you just talk within the Sharks organization, they're going to feed you a lot of positive stuff, and sometimes it's true, and sometimes they're being a little kinder to their asset or their players or whatever, right?
Mhm.
So I guess connecting with something else that we're going to talk about, the Barracuda. I talked to a lot of people about the Barracuda. I heard a lot of mixed things about the Barracuda, and so we're going to get into that, right? But with
Yeah.
Mukhamadullin, every person I talked to, I talked with at least, I would say, five NHL scouts or league sources outside of the Sharks.
Yep.
They all said the same thing. This guy is really good.
Yep.
All of them. There was not any, someone might think he's more like a number two guy. Someone might think he's more of a number four guy in the future. But across the board, though, everybody has been impressed by him, and everybody was also impressed by his NHL stint. So saying that, though, so now I've got everybody hyped up. I think there's a good chance that they send him back to the Barracuda when they come back. I'm not sure about that yet, but the reasons being, well, for one, if you get Farrell and Thrum back, you have two guys that are going to play ahead of Mukhamadullin on the left side,
Yeah.
and then you have guys like Ahotiak and Vlasic, who I know everyone is down on Vlasic, but Vlasic actually the last, if you even take out the goals, he's actually been decent the last 10
Yeah.
games or so. You really can't take that away from him. And Ahotiak, he's a guy you're trying to develop, and he is not waivers exempt. And
Yeah.
so there's sort of argument to keep him up. Also, I want to add with Vlasic too. I think people forget this too. If you're a David Quinn and you're trying to keep your locker room together,
Yeah.
if you're a veteran and you're playing well and you get shuffled off for a rookie that hasn't necessarily, how do I say it? It's not like Mukhamadullin came in and was Cale McCarr or Connor McDavid, right? And it's
No.
like, oh boy, like, yeah, we can't in any conscience send him back to the AHL. He was
Yeah.
good, but he was not so good where you look at the guy and be, oh, that guy will never play AHL game ever again. I think
Yeah.
that would be a kind of a underbaked take,
It
in
needs a
my
few more
opinion.
games there to
I
really
think
say
I
anything
think
on it.
I don't think it would hurt him. That would be
Sure.
my guess. And so anyway, if you're a Vlasic, right? Like if you're playing well, you should be rewarded, or at least you should be in a conversation. It shouldn't just be immediately like, oh, we have a hot young player, and we're gonna. Doesn't matter that you played
No.
the strong stretch of games. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah.
So that you can't keep your room together that way. It's a balance for David Quinn, keeping the veterans but also the younger players, all of them hungry and all of them
Yep.
engaged. And so anyway, David had a pretty good quote after the Anaheim game, and I asked him, do you want Mukhamadullin here, and has he made a good case for staying here? And Quinn said, love to have him here, but that's a decision that we had to make as an organization, regardless of whether he played well enough. And I think that we can agree, even the guys that I talked to, the scouts, even though they say there's things that iron out in his game, I think that he has played well enough to stay here. He is probably among the Sharks' top six best defensemen right now when they're healthy. So I'm not questioning that. But the more important thing, though, than that is what is best for his development. That's really the only thing that matters. And so there's an argument that, yes, he is among the Sharks' top six now defensemen when they're healthy, but
Sure.
is he better served playing bigger minutes in the AHL where he doesn't have a Ferraro and Thrun in front of him, doesn't have somebody in the power play in front of him, be it an Addison or a Couture or a Granlund at the point, right?
Sure.
So is he better served with those big minutes? And also, too, even though the Barracuda are in last place, they're still within shouting distance of the playoffs. If they can still make a run for the playoffs. The Sharks, if they make a run, they're just making a run to the 10th spot in the draft.
Yeah. Which they don't want to do.
Which they don't want to do anyway. But
No.
with the Barracuda, if they make a run, if they win, say, the next 5 games, they're right back in the conversation. So they're still they're still basically in it, even though they're in last place. And so, is it better for Mukhamadulin's development that he plays big games, important games with the Cuda? And of course, he's going to come back on some point too.
Yeah.
Once the Cuda are out of the playoffs or after the trade deadline or whatever. Anyway, so it's not like
Yeah.
keeping him
He's gone
from the next.
forever.
Yeah. It's not like keeping him from the next 10 AHL games or 15 or whatever is going to be crippling for his career. But anyway, I just want people to remember that as good as he's looked, I think that is the key. And I agree that what is best for his development is really the only thing that matters. And that's something that, again, a tease for a future conversation. But yeah, I think that brings up a good conversation about over baking your prospects, or kind of letting them, just kind of letting them run loose in the NHL and see what they can do, let them grow up in the NHL. And so that's something that I think I want to get to in the coming weeks, because I think that's going to be really relevant with the Sharks and all the prospects that they have.
I would not be upset if they sent him down. Not because he hasn't earned being in the NHL, just because I think what you mentioned is correct. There's a lot of guys currently that are ahead of him on the depth chart, or at least you need to keep for right now until the trade deadline and all that stuff. So, and I think hopefully he takes that well and understands that he did do really well here. And I think they told him that, that he's done very well on the Sharks. And I think it's just good to have, like, a lot of Sharks defenseman prospects are they have elements that are really good. Like Havlet's got a great shot, but he's 5'10", or Cagnoni is a great playmaker and a great,
but he's 5'10",
but he's 5'9". Or like Jake Furlong is a good defenseman, but he's 6'2" or whatever, but he's not offensively gifted at all. It's like Mukhamadullin has all of the elements to be a top 4 defender at the NHL level. That makes you excited. He's great mobility, great shot from the point, great playmaker, can play decent defense right now. And he can close on players really fast. He plays physical. He's got a lot of the elements that can turn into a top 4 defender. And that's something and we both, I think, had him ranked 3rd on our prospect rankings in the beginning of the year. I think we did. I had him
3rd. 3rd after Smith and Eklund, but now Eklund has graduated. So he's a clear number 2. And by the end of the season, Mukhamadullin may not be on this list anymore, because there's a good chance that he will have graduated. He's shown enough that I could see it.
Possible.
I just don't think that needs to be right after the All-Star break. And I just want to give a little tease. This episode is going to be a lot of teases, a lot of future conversations here. But so these conversations I've had with people outside the organization, I'm gonna start sharing them. I have an article plan, but the thing I want to tease about it is that I heard a really exciting projection for Mukhamadullin. Definitely a projection above a middle pairing defenseman, and a name that I heard I was like, oh, that makes sense. He looks like it. He kind of looks like him. And no, it's not Chris Pronger.
It's Chris Pronger. I knew it.
No, it's not. It's not. So it's probably a more realistic comp than a Hall of Fame defenseman. So I'm not saying Mukhamadullin is going to reach those heights. So I don't want to oversell it, but it's man, you watch him. He's a guy you watch and you just watch him like, oh, I get it. I get why the Sharks picked him from the Devils prospect pool over like guys that might have been available, guys like Holtz or Casey, guys in that range. Again, let's throw out Luke Hughes. We weren't getting him. You weren't getting Dawson Mercer for Timo Meier. So throw out those guys. You weren't getting Nemec either. But beyond, the Devils are so deep in their prospect pool that this is if Mukhamadulin's a consolation prize, it's a damn good one. Yeah,
they've got now, if you graduate Eklund, they've got their 2nd best prospect in Mukhamadullin, probably their 3rd best prospect in Musty, and Zetterlund and Ohodiuk, and another pick for Timo Meier, which is so I'm basically trying to say they got like their 2nd and 3rd best prospect as of now, plus Zetterlund, plus Ohodiuk, and another pick for Timo Meier, which is an insane trade. In hindsight, an insanely good trade.
Yeah,
as of now, but stuff changes. Timo Meier could still.
Yeah, I think Timo's going to find his game. Timo's a terrific player.
Yeah, for sure. A little bit of a transition. Mukhamadullin got named to the AHL All-Star game while being in the NHL, which I thought was hilarious. It just a funny quirk, and now we kind of know why. Basically, Gushchin isn't going to play in the AHL All-Star game, which is very sad.
Well, I don't know if they're actually connected. Jonathan Becker actually teased during the jersey unveiling. They had a State of the Sharks that we talked about last week.
Yep.
He teased that the Barracuda were going to get somebody else, and so I think that this was in the works. And so it's just more of a shame that they weren't going to play together, because I think that's what the Sharks are hoping, that they would have 2 of their brightest young prospects in the Barracuda, with the Barracuda now playing together.
Mhm.
at the All-Star game in their backyard. That would have been nice. So with Gushchin, I think that the injury projection shouldn't be too long term. I was initially told day to day.
Yeah.
I wonder if it might be a little bit longer, but the sense I get though is that it's not something that should take him out for too long. Hopefully he's back. The Barracuda are back in action after the All-Star game February 9th. And so that'll be a nice target for him to get back and to help with sort of whatever playoff push that they're going to try. And then of course trade deadline March 8th, and there's a good chance that you'll see him right back with the Sharks. So hopefully he's healthy for both those things.
Now here's the ultimate gamesmanship. We send down Eklund to the AHL to make the Sharks worse and to make the Barracuda better. Boom. Brilliant. Brilliant. So, I
I'm
mean,
not
Eklund might be a
sure.
little
Yeah,
upset
yeah.
about that
I think you'd
one.
be more than a little upset by that.
Yeah, I know. I am super sad. I've been waiting to see Gushchin around, his peers around AHL All-Stars, and not gonna happen. So, but now I can buy a Mukhamadullin Barracuda jersey
Yeah,
or
right.
Mukhamadullin AHL or All-Star
And
jersey.
you can get the 7 and 8, so you can switch them back and forth too. So
Ooh,
yeah, they're right. The 5, just keep the 5 on, and then
I love it.
get two different nameplates and get a 7 and 8, and just
Beautiful. Now you're
or
thinking.
you can really show your love for the Russians. Have a 75 on one side and 85 on the other side.
Oh yeah. Now you're really thinking, man. This is going to be a Frankenstein of a jersey. It's been a good week. That's why I'm wearing a jersey, because there's a lot of fun, you know, prospect related things that happen
Yeah,
with the
yeah. Things
Sharks.
feel like this week that with Mukhamadullin showing that NHL caliber play, and
Yep.
obviously Eklund showing NHL caliber work at center. So a lot of exciting prospects, kind of stuff. Also, to another tease I want to drop too. My writer Nikita Sokolov, who has done incredible features on Mukhamadullin and on Romanov. He has a terrific one about Gushchin coming out. Unfortunately, Gushchin will not be. It was set to run during the AHL All-Star week,
Yep.
in sort of simultaneously with the AHL All-Star week. I'm still gonna put it out because it's a great story. And anyway, so look for that.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little bit about Tomas Hertl,
Mm.
and what we're thinking might, or what we think about the quote that happened this week, basically related to Hertl in a discussion about his future happening in the summer. Hertl, as we all know, got re-signed to a long-term deal while the Sharks were still in that transition period from Joe Will and DW to Mike Greer eventually. And it seemed like at the time it was a team going in two directions, where you're signing one of your older vets to a long-term deal, but you're also rebuilding and shipping off guys like Brent Burns and eventually
No, I
Meyer and
disagree with that though.
Carlson.
Yeah, no, yeah. I want to address that.
Hmm.
Anyway, though, the quote exactly from Hertl is, um, "We will, we'll talk after the season again. What are the plans here long term?" And maybe he says it's best to trade me now, my career, and get
Sure.
something. And so, anyway, the reason why I jumped in on you there is so it was indeed a transition phase when Hertl signed. It was March 2022.
Sure.
Doug had stepped down in November or so. Joe Will had taken over. Um, Mike Greer was still not a thought in anybody's, not a twinkle in anybody's eye that he would
Of
take over the
course.
Sharks in a couple of months. And at that point, the Sharks, when Hertl signed, the talk was still that they weren't going to rebuild. They
Yeah.
were going to reset. They were going to reload all the different R words we talked about with Corey, right, a couple weeks ago. That all the R words except for rebuild, and the Hertl signing seemed to be a sign of that. That okay, they were going to try to reload quickly and turn this thing around pretty quickly.
Sure.
And I think that that's what Hertl signed for. I don't think Hertl signed for a rebuild. I know a lot of fans, they look at the timing of him and they say like, "Oh, Hertl's in a gilded cage. Tommy should be happy. He brought this on himself. He should have known better." Now, the he should have known better part yeah, someone should have told them, look, I know the Sharks are telling you this, but look at the reality of it.
Yeah.
You guys aren't going to be very good. It's going to be really, really hard to make you guys really good with all the contracts and all that kind of stuff around you guys.
Yeah.
So maybe Hertl should have got some advice in that area, but I don't think that the Sharks told Tommy Hertl something like, "Hey,
Well,
we're about to rebuild here,
of course not.
and do you want to sign on for that?" Oh, sure, yeah, I will sign. If you can give me 8 years, 65.1 million, okay, I'll sign on for that.
Again, I'm not
No,
saying what I thought Hurdle thought. I'm saying what I thought or what fans kind of perceived to be a team on the decline,
but
basically.
I think though that's they're different discussions though, right? And so that's
Sure.
why I want to. I know that fans thought that. Look, I thought that, right?
We all thought it. The whole NHL
I
world
thought
thought it.
that they should trade Hurdle back then, and
Of
nothing to
course.
do with his quality on or off the ice, but just that I didn't see
Hmm.
much of a immediate future for the Sharks team to be competitive.
Of
But
course.
I think it is really important because I do think a lot of fans mix up the timelines and they think, oh, Hurdle
Yeah.
somehow knew or this is what he signed up for, and I don't think this is what he signed up for. And so that leads to, I guess, my larger point and another tease that I'm digging on. But I would guess that he would want to leave, and I that's a feeling that I've gotten since training camp of this year, just sort of
Mm.
puttering around on it, digging around, talking to people. That it's not like when you talk with Tommy about this that he's like, oh yeah, I'm in this. I'm in this to the end.
Yeah.
um, and so anyway, beyond that though, yeah. So the like you said, the feeling is that this was not something that he's in the long haul for this rebuild. And again, this is not what he signed up for. This is not what he re-signed for. And
Yep.
so I think
Yep.
the larger question that we've talked about that I'm digging on is can they move him this summer with his big contract? And my immediate assumption has been that it's really hard to, and I've said that many times. But and here's the tease. I talked to someone outside the Sharks organization that told me that he thinks it's actually pretty doable,
Yeah.
and that's a big thing to hear from somebody outside the organization. Again, this is the reason why I talk with people outside the organization, because if someone in the Sharks organization tells me, "Oh yeah, we could trade Tommy Hertl for sure," with the no retention, and yeah, we'll get this and that for him, I'd be like, I don't know. I think you have a vested interest in telling me that.
Sure.
So the person telling me this doesn't have as much of an interest in it, and so I'm gonna dig on what he said, and I'll report back in due time on that, because what he told me was interesting, and I wonder if it could factor in making him a little bit more movable this summer.
Hmm.
Um, so we'll see. And one thing that I am working on too, and this is a story that will come out tomorrow. Hertl really is a brand new player this year. I know that if you look at the points, 34 and 48 games, it doesn't sound like that much. It actually is behind his pace last year, 63 points. But if you look at just how dominant he has been in terms of controlling the puck, his on the ice deeks, for example, just you notice if you watch a lot of games, just he's able to beat guys at will this year, which he wasn't able to do this year.
Hmm.
And so just one tease for the article that's coming out tomorrow is that he's gone from he was like 90th in the league in deeks last year to really, really high. And that's a sign of a guy that is confident in control of the puck. And so those 34 points in 48 games this year, if
Yep.
he had a better team around him, those would be a lot more points. Even if he had last year's team around him with Meyer and Carlson, even if he had those guys or just those guys, I think he'd be a point per game player this year. And
Hmm.
so he has found his game, and that will make him easier to move.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One, the NHL's market for centers, despite a long and
Good
kind
point.
of risky contract for Hertl, the NHL is always looking for centers exactly like Hertl, and especially competitive teams that are trying to extend their window just a bit, and they have some bad contracts that they might be wanting to send back or that kind of thing. I think there's a deal there just from an outside perspective, just to think about it, but. It would take some doing because he does have a big contract, but it's not like Greer hasn't finagled a huge contract or 2 or 3 before, so
Mhm.
it's possible. And yeah, it's really all about Hertl wanting to leave and a team wanting to find it. Like nobody thought we'd get a Carlson deal, and then we got a Carlson deal pretty quickly. I think there is a market for him. That's my first thought, and I think that my second thought is I still, and we may never know the answer to this question. We still don't. I just don't understand the thinking behind re-signing Hertl in the first place. And we've gone over this a lot because yes, maybe they did think that they were going to turn it around or whatever, but then within 3 months they're hiring a guy who then is like, okay, we'll see, we're going to trade Burns, and then trades under a couple guys like within a year after that. So and seemingly goes through the rebuild, and I'm happy that they did it finally and they cut their losses and started
Mhm.
this rebuild process, but it's still it didn't show a clear direction from the top at the time
Sure.
and then throughout. So that's like still a mystery to me why they did it in the first place instead of just doing a Meyer type deal. But whatever. Now we just have to find a team that's gonna basically send us bad contracts back to take Hertl.
Well, my understanding, and I mentioned this before, is that Doug was always going to resign Hertl. He always wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And so Joe was, I think, still, even though Joe made decisions independent eventually, like the Kakinen trade, I believe, is Joe Will's.
Sure.
But Joe was still operating under sort of that framework
Yeah.
or outline or whatever, right? And that was that they were going to try to re-sign Tomas Hertl. And so he did. At some point from Joe Will, the Doug regime to Mike Greer, um, something changed. It might
Yep.
be a little more subtle than it looks, because if you, again, going back to our conversation with Corey, Corey pointed out that, look, if the Sharks were better last year, as their underlying stats suggested they should be,
Mm-hmm.
and with Eric and Timo having career seasons, that the Sharks should have had a better record. So with a better record, maybe they don't move on from those guys. And
Yeah.
even Brent Burns, right? Brent Burns was directly because Brent wanted to leave.
Yeah.
If Burns wanted to stay, if Burns was like a Couture and just say, oh, we'll run this back again, right? They would have brought him back and they would have tried it once again, probably with Eric and Brent and Timo, and with better goaltending, maybe they get themselves into the fringe of the wild card race. I don't know. I actually think that is possible, considering how good a season both
Eric had.
Meyer and
Yeah.
Carlson had last year, right? But anyway, though, and so it looks really sharp, I guess, the contrast. But if you look at sort of the behind the scenes of of all these different
Mm-hmm.
events, Hertl resigning, hiring Mike Greer, trading Brent Burns, and
Sure.
eventually the trades of Timo and Eric, that it's not so cut and dry.
Yeah.
And so it's not as like Hasselplattner just did a U-turn. It was more like a really slow left. And then, oh crap, we got a U-turn.
Shit. Yeah. It just that period of time was just like a rudderless ship in the ocean, just like steadily, just like taking on water and
Yeah,
taking
and
on
that's
water.
that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Doug has received criticism for that. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I have mentioned too that I think Doug saw Tomas Hertl as a Joe Pavelski, Logan Couture leader type guy that could be with the organization
Yeah.
for not, if not the lifetime of his career, as we've seen with Joe
Lifetime
Pavelski,
of the
for a
contract.
really
Yeah.
long time, a really long time.
Yeah.
And so that was his thinking, and I think that is defensible thinking. Whether you think of whether or not they should resign or not, but that wasn't a wild thought on Doug's
Hmm.
part. Hertl is proving it this year. I guess my final point is that Hertl, if you watched him last year, he wasn't a difference maker. It
Sure.
was worrisome watching him last year. Like
Oh
I
yeah.
said, he couldn't beat guys going through the middle of the ice like he used to be able to in previous years. He looked slower. Um, I think I wondered if it was age, because he was about to cross 30.
Hmm.
But this year, though, again, throw out the points. Think about how bad a team he's playing on. He is a difference maker.
Yeah.
If you just look at relatively, like the first 11 games of the year, when they started out 0, 10, and 1, he was literally the only competent looking AHL forward that the Sharks were playing at that point, because everybody else was struggling. Eklund, Zetterlund was started off on the fourth line. Granlund was injured for most of that. Couture was gone, obviously. So anyway, if you look at it relatively, he's been the Sharks' best forward by far this season. Maybe only Granlund over the last couple of months is in that discussion. But anyway, so Hertl is back to being a legitimate difference maker. I do think that teams do see that, and then as you mentioned, as you alluded to, with Carlson, that if you have a guy that is like that, even with a terrible contract, that teams will at least talk with you and consider and try to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah. We just had 2 center deals in the NHL, both for expiring UFAs that were first round pick plus other picks and prospects and stuff. And I can only imagine what Hertl would have gotten in 2021, 2022 to a contender.
That's not to think about it.
I know, because now it's like maybe we'll get a first round pick if it's similar to the Carlson deal where we take on a Granlund and a Ruta and et cetera,
Right.
and Hoffman. So maybe that's the deal. And you know what? I think at this point, if Hertl wants to go and have a more quick, like, while he's still got a peak of play, have a competitive Stanley Cup aspirations on a team, he should go for it. I love Hertl to death. He's been one of my favorite players since he was drafted, but maybe it's time.
I would also argue too that if they have to keep him just because his contract is tough to move, or he I don't know, changes his mind and he wants to stay, he likes what he sees with the Sharks, that he's also really valuable on the ice. And we talked a lot about this, just how he makes every line, how he still, like I said, he drives a line still.
Yep.
And so that is the definition of a difference maker. And while he may not be obviously a franchise Connor McDavid type, he still is a difference maker on your line. And so so he still has a lot of value to the Sharks as a mentor. Just imagine where the Sharks team would be without him. And what would Eklund and Zetterlund be doing? And then let's say Granlund is hurt and Couture is gone the whole season.
We'd be Chicago.
Right now Chicago without Bedard.
Without Bedard. Yep. And also he's now part of Team McDavid, because in the NHL All-Star game he got assigned to Team McDavid, so that's got to up his trade value, right? Maybe he goes out and puts up like 6 goals in the All-Star game.
That'll be awesome. I'm cheering for that, because
Me too.
I'm cheering for one of the last round guys to do that. Toronto, Bjorkstrand, and who's the other? Trocheck. So
Trocheck, yeah.
It'll be awesome. One of those guys puts on a show, reminds the people that I may have been the 30th best NHL player here, but being the 30th best NHL player is still pretty fucking good.
Yeah. And Vetrano was one of the hottest goal scorers in the league in the first 2 weeks of the season, or month of the season even.
Yeah.
So he's cooled off a lot, but I super pumped. I mean, the NHL All-Star weekend is always fun and a shit show, so I'm excited to watch it this weekend, including the skills competition tonight. So super pumped. I'm the only fan in the NHL that's actually excited about the skills competition. Not because I want to, I don't know if it actually showcases NHL skills all that well, but it's just always such a nightmare to produce and to see on television. It's the only reason I want to watch it. It's like watching car crashes in NASCAR. Basically, that's what it is. All right.
Well, we've got a special guest on today. I want to preface our guest by saying or mentioning that a lot of you guys have asked us about, what's going on with the Barracuda. Right now, they are in last place. They're 11 points back of the last playoff spot in the Pacific. They've been bad for a number of years. And so what's going on with them? Should John McCarthy be fired? Just looking some of the deeper issues with the Barracuda. And so anyway, part of the reason why we're having our guest Patrick Williams on is because I think it's hard when you cover a specific AHL team. You kind of get caught in that sort of a sort of echo chamber with that
Mm-hmm.
team, and you don't really know what's going on beyond that team. Kind of, you don't know who are the good AHL players, who are the good AHL teams. Of course, you can look at the record, but it's not like the NHL where there's so many people watching that you get a good sense of how to measure your team against a competition. The AHL, it's really, really hard because there's very few people that really have a league-wide perspective. So anyway, Patrick Williams, he is on the AHL beat for AHL.com, for AHL.com too. And so I can't think of anybody better in terms of having that sort of league-wide perspective. So welcome, Patrick.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks for coming, Patrick. Let's start off with a little bit of an easy question, I guess. So fans kind of have asked the question of Sharks GM Mike Greer in his last media availability last week, if it's kind of okay to be disappointed in the Barracuda, to paraphrase whoever that fan was. Would you say disappointed is a good word to kind of describe this Barracuda season?
Yes, I would hesitantly say yes.
Okay.
I mean, they're below where I thought they would be. That being said, I don't know that they left themselves a lot of margin for error either. Just in the sense that they didn't have necessarily a ton of veteran supplemental help there, right? Like those vets that you can count on, that I think often are overlooked, but are absolutely vital at this level. And, I think of, somebody that might be familiar for Pacific Division fans out there would be like an Adam Cracknell. He's been at Bakersfield, Tucson, Henderson now, a guy who's there on an AHL contract, not going to be called up, and is there, strictly to help both on and off the ice. Like, he's a guy who can still go out and get you 20 goals, 25 goals in a good season, but he's also there to kind of stabilize the younger roster, right? And I guess the question that always comes up is, how do you evaluate a team? And it's so difficult with this league because the first question, like my question back to that question, is always, well, what is that team's objective?
Sure.
Because 32 teams in this league have some very different objectives. Some are in it to win it every year. And then you have kind of the other extreme where as long as they figure, as long as we're developing 5 or 6 prospects, hey, if we win, great. If not, so be it. That's our objective here. And so, it makes it difficult to kind of really get a sense of the standings. Okay, like who is underperforming, who is overachieving, who's kind of going right, according to what they had expected. So I think the Barracuda are a disappointment for sure. But, then when you look at the roster, like I said, it's, they were, everything had to break just right, I think, for this team to have any real significant success.
This is a conversation I've been having with a lot of people in terms of just how many elite high-end AHL players do the Barracuda actually have. And of course that's different, right? Obviously a guy who's elite in the AHL may not be elite in the NHL. So it's always hard to measure. A guy like Cracknell, who you mentioned, not saying he's an elite AHL player, but he's a guy, he goes up to NHL, he's not sniffing 20 goals. He's lucky to get 5 goals or whatever, right? But in the AHL though, he is a high-end, he might be considered a high-end player. And so if you try to judge the Barracuda and their record stack them up against the rest of their division, and this is, again, conversation I've had with other scouts, executives, see what you think, Patrick. So how many elite high-end AHL players do the Barracuda have? Well, they have one in Ryan Carpenter, but he's not with the team right now. And
I was just going to say that,
high-end veterans that you expected to be on your team to lead the way, but he is not. He's on the Sharks' 4th line. Maybe Leon Gavanka, who is down there and having a good season. And, of course, maybe Danil Gushchin, they're also who's emerged as a top-flight AHL player. But that might be it, though, in terms of the kind of the elite players. I know there's some other good ones that they're missing, like a Justin Bailey. But I don't know what you think of that kind of summary. And also if you can compare that to other teams in our division.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very fair assessment. You look at... Okay, Gushchin, he's I think he's maybe come along a little bit faster than I expected. Like he's really been impressive from what I've seen with him. Carpenter, I was going to mention him. I mean, like a great example. Like that was a guy that, you know, in a lot of other teams, he could have been down with the AHL club all season and kind of really stabilize things. And yeah, again, this also comes up to the issue of, okay, well, what's your NHL team doing? Well, your NHL team is struggling. They're hard pressed for depth. So automatically, okay, a guy like Carpenter gets pulled up kind of at the first opportunity. And so, that lack of depth really just kind of permeates everything. And you go up and down the lineup. I think at this level, Oscar Lindblom has the potential to be, a high end player, but he's
had the
injury early in the year. He's had a tough season, and he's also in that strange stage now of a kind of like a Gavanka almost, where is he a veteran? Is he a prospect? Is he something in between? I mean, is that kind of that no man's land that a lot of players in their mid, even sometimes latter half of their 20s find themselves in, as opposed to, let's say, like, a guy who's 30 plus, who's very much at this point, an AHL player, and is kind of settled in and is at peace with that. A lot of, that's something I think people overlook too, that takes some time, I think, for players to get their head around, like, okay, I'm going to embrace the role of an AHL veteran versus I still have a chance to make the NHL. I still have a chance to get some games up there. I think it's a difficult concept for players to accept. But once they do, and they really like a Cracknell, for example, once they embrace that and they're all in with what they're doing at the AHL level, and have kind of an eye on maybe what they're going to do after hockey, those players they tend to be your best types of vets, right? So I look up and down that Barracuda roster. It's a lot of guys that are kind of on their second, third chances. A lot of guys that are prospects, but they're different stages of their own development, and they've maybe had some setbacks. So it's a kind of a mix, a little bit of everything that doesn't quite seem to work together, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, we're seeing on ice that's not quite working together. But I wanted to mention with Carpenter too, a lot of Sharks fans, just to kind of put it in perspective, the Sharks have been missing Logan Couture for almost the entire season, and think about how tough that's been on the Sharks. I mean, for a Barracuda, Carpenter is basically like missing Logan Couture for an entire season. You're 1C for an entire season.
Yeah. And I think the other issue for the Barracuda, quite frankly, is the goaltending, right? Like, you don't have that number 3 necessarily, right?
NHL number 3,
NHL number 3, where guy that can easily go up and down. He can go up to the NHL when needed if there's an injury or what have you. But when he's in the AHL, he can be a real dependable number 1 and bring along, number 2 prospect, right? And I think Mackie Niemi, at one point, maybe had that potential, but there's just been so much injury issues for him, and just he's had a tough go of it too. So he's still trying to find his game, and nobody has stepped forward, right? And it's a team with an 884 save percentage, and it's going to be difficult to score your way out of that kind of situation as well. And that's obviously not all in the goaltending. There's definitely been some defensive misadventures that I've seen, watching the Barracuda at different points, and, they give up the third most shots per game in the league. So, as with most things in hockey, you can usually point at several factors, for why things aren't quite working.
Yeah, there's we're going to get into the just the different position groups here in a second on the Barracuda. The elephant in the room, I guess, is John McCarthy. This is his second year coaching the Barracuda. It's his second year as the head coach, as a head coach in general. How much of the team's success or their lack of success can be chalked up to him being kind of new for this role, do you think? Or is that hard to evaluate?
It is hard to evaluate, because I look at that roster, I'm thinking, well, okay, all right. I think of some of the best coaches in the league. Like, I'll think of a Todd Nelson in Hershey. I'll think of a Carl Taylor in Milwaukee, like the high end guys that, every year kind of talked up as potential NHL head coaching candidates. And I asked myself, okay, well, what would they be doing with this roster? And would they be able to kind of coach it up a little bit? Yeah, probably a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure that this team would be significantly better off either, right? I mean, it's, there's a lot of gaps on that roster that just, you can only coach your way through that so much. I think the first thing that you would like to see, I guess, would be the penalty kill. I think that's an area where you really could start to, kind of stop some of that, the leaks in the boat, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get yourself a good penalty kill, get that thing, start with that and then work your way up, right? That's one of the first things I look at for a team that's struggling. And, it's just so demoralizing too, right? Like it leaves a team with no margin for error, so that's the first issue. And, as far as McCarthy, I mean, he walked in a difficult situation because, he came into, a team where the NHL club's going under obviously a long extended rebuild. The AHL team hasn't had much success really. I mean, other than that one run in 2017 to the Western Conference Final, Barracuda haven't had all that much success, right? So, there's not that winning culture, that expectation where, like I looked at like a Providence, for example, or Toronto or Hershey, teams that every year generally are in the mix, and there's a certain expectation, and success creates more success, becomes a more attractive place to play because, everybody wants a winner. And if you go, let's say, to Hershey, you're able to play deep into the playoffs and maybe get yourself an opportunity either with the big club or with somebody else's NHL club. So, it's all kind of interlinked and all. Well, one hand feeds the other, but I think McCarthy, he's a young coach, right? There's going to be growing pains with any coach, and I think you could pretty much everyone who's anyone as a coach has at one point or another come through the AHL, right? And like if you talk to a Bruce Boudreau, if you talk to a Barry Trotz, if you talk to John Tortorella, they would all tell you like their first couple of years in the AHL as a head coach, there were some real growing pains, and I don't think McCarthy would be any different from that. But I would like to see him, maybe have a little bit more of a chance for success with, just a better roster to work with as well.
Is he one of the youngest AHL coaches? I would guess he is, but I don't know.
Yeah, I believe at this point he's the second youngest. Trent Vogelhuber, I believe, is slightly younger by maybe a year or something in Cleveland. So, but yeah, he's definitely on the younger side, which that a lot of teams like that now, right? Like relating to kind of the younger personalities, and there is definitely a change that I've seen, with players of today versus even 10 years ago. Just in terms of they arrive with a lot more kind of a refined skill and talent, but they also kind of need a lot more managing too, like personality wise as well, ego wise, all those elements. So there is a lot more of a hands-on, meeting with players more often, a lot more teaching, that kind of thing, as opposed to, like when I started and it was kind of like, well, what coach says is the law, and don't bother him. So it's just a different world in that regard.
I wonder too if they somehow missed on when they hired John as head coach, and it was kind of a weird transition because I believe Roy Sommer, I think from everyone I think I understood, he thought he was coming back for the 2022-23 season, the first season at Tech CU Arena. And then within, I don't know, a couple weeks or whatnot, that changed. And I wonder if they missed out on, not necessarily Roy, because maybe Roy wouldn't want to do it, but bringing on somebody with John to be sort of a mentor. And I know that Roy was a mentor to John, but of course, that was before. And so one of the reasons why I wonder and think that is just, for example, one thing we talked with John about this before the season, it was a tough tough offseason for the Barracuda with all the stuff with Martin Kaut and other accusations of players just not being treated really, really well and that sort of thing, right? But anyway, one of the things that John said that did sort of allude to something that Martin Kaut said about just the team not. Martin said the team was just playing for themselves, kind of. The guys were just playing for themselves. That's what he felt, and that's why he didn't want to fight for them, because it wasn't a team and that sort of thing, right? And how true that is about all the fighting, because that seems still very, very wild. But the point though is that John did say though that one thing that he wanted to work on was sort of building that team togetherness early on. And it made me think of Roy Sommer used to always have a camping trip during the before the start of the season. And I asked John, you guys can do a camping trip? Because of course John was a captain of a lot of Roy's Barracuda teams, and so John was on those camping trips. And John, maybe no great fan of the outdoors, just shut that down immediately, like, no, we're not doing a camping trip. But nonetheless, though, having somebody there though who could have maybe reminded John, like that first year, 2022-23, hey, maybe we got to do something. I know it's a tough year. We're still coming back from COVID in some ways. And so I'm not going to throw it all on John's doorstep, but maybe somebody that's an example of maybe a veteran mentor could have reminded John, like, hey, this is important too. And yeah.
It's really difficult when you have a team full of prospects or players who think they're prospects or would be prospects, because it's almost like trying to herd cats, as I've heard different coaches say. I mean, you got 25 players and you have 25 agendas, and it's not necessarily always what's best for the team, right? Mm-hmm. And that's, again, I come back over and over to the veteran mentorship. You need a good core, and the best teams in this league year in and year out have a good core of 5 or 6 vets, guys that are able to kind of get all those players out of the same page, get them to understand how team success will eventually create your own personal success. And also just help these players with the transition, right? Like to pro life. You think of somebody who's 20, 21 years old. They're coming to San Jose, to the Bay Area, expensive. They're trying to learn how to live on their own. There's all the off ice, adjustments. We sometimes, I think, forget how young some of these players really are. I mean, they're barely out of high school in some cases, and they're showing up, and they arrive, and they think they want to be the NHL yesterday, and now all of a sudden now you're in the AHL, and there's just all kinds of there's just the everyday problems that happen for anybody, right? Like you're homesick, or you're broke up with your significant other, or just whatever the case may be. Like you need that kind of that big brother figure there, right? Somebody that and I see the best veterans, the best captains in the league, like they'll get some of the young guys, right? It's usually a player who's married. Though, because some of these young players don't always eat that well, right? They don't know how to cook for themselves that well. Like, so they'll bring them over, let's say, for home cooked meal, right? Or they'll give them a ride to practice. Just little things like that kind of breed that team cohesion that you're talking about. That with the camping trip, and I find the camping trip and that sort of thing are good as a starting point, but the best teams kind of have that day in and day out cohesion too, right? Where it's those little things, right? Like, and you have everybody kind of rooting for each other's success, And I look at like this year, obviously Hershey's having a, possibly a record-breaking season. But, one of the things I notice about that team a lot is guys are, you'll even see it on social media, like guys are happy when one of their teammates gets called up, even though that could have been their call up, right? And like you just see them kind of rooting each other on. And, so, when you kind of get those 25 players and they're all kind of like, hey, why'd that guy get caught up instead of me? That's where those kind of those cracks in the foundation start to happen. And, but a lot of times it's that year in, year out, carrying that success over season to season. And I know people don't like the word culture, but you create a certain culture, certain set of expectations, a certain way of doing things that carry over. And, that's difficult too, when you have so much turnover, when I looked at like one player, for example, that I thought was a really good move to bring in last year was Kyle Criscuolo. I thought he was fantastic. He was exactly the kind of guy, like a glue guy, a cohesion guy, really smart, great leader, can certainly contribute on the ice, can go up to the NHL club in a pinch. And I would have certainly done everything I could have done. And I'm not saying the Barracuda or the Sharks didn't, but to bring a guy like that back, or somebody who's his equivalent, those are the guys you need. Like, they're not necessarily the superstar veterans, but they're those guys that really help the coaching staff out, right? Like, coaches, he's only one person, and even with some staff, there's only so much time to go around, and you got 25 people that all need your attention and all need your help, and some of those vets can really help bring that along.
Yeah, and that reminds me too that kind of a separate point or related, that John McCarthy himself, he was the captain of the Barracuda. I think even back to Worcester for so long and provided so much stability. And
very, very good captain. Yeah.
Yeah, and they haven't had that in a number of years since John had to retire. They haven't been able to fill that void with anybody. For a long stretch. But anyway, I wonder too, and I've talked about this in relation to David Quinn, and David Quinn, obviously, like John, not a very good record in his league right now either, and whether or not they should get the axe, whether or not they should bear the brunt of the poor record. And the two questions that jump out, and we've sort of touched on one already. How good did you think this team was, right? And I think we've dug into that a little bit, and we'll dig deeper into it a little later. But also too, considering that both the Sharks and the Barracuda are rebuilding. And so anyway, do you have any thoughts on John's ability, or how he's done developing players? Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, when you look at, the players that have gone up, I think he's done okay. I mean, it's hard to say, like, he hasn't had a ton of time with them yet, right?
Sure,
like, I like to give a coach at least full 2 seasons, probably 3 if we're being, an ideal situation. He hasn't always had the easiest players either. Like you mentioned, Cal, I think of Ryan Merkley. That was a difficult situation. Like, he went to Colorado, and like, for me, that was like the test with Merkley, where like, okay, Greg Cronin got his hands on him for, half a season or whatever it was, and he couldn't
washed his hands really quickly too.
And so, like, that for me was like, all right, I'm not going to certainly fault McCarthy there, right? Like, players have to own some of I mean, this is a team, let's be honest, is struggling across the board. NHL club, AHL club, like, if people are looking for blame, I mean, hey, I think everybody can take some of that blame, and but I also know that the best teams, the best operations in the league, like Tampa and Syracuse, like, it's not about blame, it's about how do we improve, how do we get better, and not just how do we point fingers. So and again, that just starts with that certain foundation, that culture that you have to establish, and it takes time. It's not something you can kind of just whip up in one off season. But I think McCarthy he's done okay in terms of his number one job, which is to develop players. And of course that comes back to the whole argument. Okay, does winning help development? Does development help winning? How do they work hand in hand? But he hasn't had the winning part as much to help him along. So, but when I look at the players that have gone up, I mean, I think he's done okay. But he's not necessarily, I think, also working with a fantastic group of prospects either. So it's the old adage, like, somebody goes to the grocery store, buys the ingredients, brings them home to the chef. Well, the chef can only work with what you bring them home, right? Like,
sure.
So it's a little bit of everything, quite frankly, I think.
Yeah, I think it's also you make a great point about it. It's maybe a little early to evaluate that. I know that Roy received a lot of criticism at the end for the Barracuda not turning out too many great NHL players, but I don't know if he was given a lot to, and I think I lean more toward that thinking. With John here, we've only had about a year and a half so far to evaluate that. There are some kind of promising players. I will mention them, like William Eklund has, not to give
For sure.
John sole credit for William's development, but William definitely developed down there and has done a good job this season with the Sharks. Shakir Mukhamadullin looks like he, at least in the AHL, looks like he grew this season from training camp this fall to the last time I saw him in the AHL. Of course, now he's in the NHL. Those are a couple guys. Of course, there are guys who have sort of plateaued too. You mentioned Merkley. Thomas Bortolo might be in that camp too. So I'm not trying to say that John is a unqualified success in development, but like you mentioned, the jury is still out, and there's a couple of promising cases and a couple of not so promising cases.
I think that's probably a very fair assessment. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that Gushchin had come along a little bit faster than you had expected. What have you seen from him?
I just see a player that, like, is playing with confidence, right? Like that's one of the biggest challenges in this league. Just, players have had, generally by the time they arrive in the AHL, they've had nothing but success for the most part. Like whether they're coming from college, junior, Europe, wherever the case may be, and they come in the AHL, it can be kind of a rude awakening for a lot of young players. And they hit that wall, and a lot of them don't get over that wall. I see a player there that like you like to see him now. He's starting to drive the play. He's controlling the play. Like he wants to kind of be the guy, and so that for me is really encouraging. And especially too where like he's asked to do more than maybe if he was with a different club where there was more around him. So like he's taking a lot more on his shoulders. That's that then maybe he would otherwise have to do. So I'm pretty impressed. Like I said, like I think he is further along, and when he came in, obviously there, your higher end draft pick, there's certainly some potential, but we've seen there's a long list of first, second, third round picks that have come through all 32 clubs and haven't panned out, so you never quite know. But I think he's ahead of schedule, if anything, and I want to see where he can go with this, and maybe I guess if the Barracuda really start to fall out of contention, you wouldn't have that opportunity to have him be in kind of a playoff race. Maybe then at that point you want to see him up with the Sharks more, and so get an opportunity there, kind of see what he could do. So it's tough. Like, if, last season, for example, like the Barracuda were kind of in a fight for a playoff spot, so like, I like players to go through that, right? Like they're playing a lot of high pressure games rather than going up the NHL. Maybe they're not necessarily getting, ton of minutes, or they're not, in those high pressure games. So, it's really a lot's going to probably depend on next month or so. Let's see where this Barracuda goes standings wise, because right now they're yeah. I mean, and it's quite frankly, it's pretty hard to miss the playoffs in this league. I mean, 23 out of 32 clubs make it, so. Yeah. They're at present, they're 9 points back. They do have 31 games to go. So, I have seen teams make up differences. This is a league of streaks. I always say that, you can go on. It's pretty easy in this league to go on a 6-game losing streak or a 6-game winning streak. And really you see those big swings in the standings. But no, certainly, they really, they have to make up some ground here in the next month or so. Or else at that point, then you have to really think, okay, what's for a player like Gushchin, where is he best served to kind of play out the rest of the season?
Yeah, the last few seasons, probably this season too, the Barracuda hadn't had a lot of defensive depth. This year they brought in Gavanka, they rotated in like Mukhamadullin and Henry Thrun before he got called up, and they have like NHL-ish vets in Radim Simek and Nikolai Knizhov. But they're still last in the league in goals against. So I think you said earlier, there is a component of like they allow so many shots, some poor team defense, and inconsistent goaltending. But is it just a combination of all of the factors, or is it?
Yeah, it's your goaltenders are third most shots faced in the league, so they're getting kind of pelted every night. They struggle, then that kind of causes a ripple effect that, okay, now some of the, your defensemen, your forwards aren't able to maybe push the play as much or take chances. So, I think to the Barracuda's credit, they're I believe they're 14th right now in goals per game. So they are kind of keeping up more or less offensively, but it's a little bit of everything. Kind of like, you take one brick out of the wall and, the rest of, it all starts to ripple. And they're in a tough spot right now. And they're, that's where you're looking for some people to step up and kind of take the bull by the horns here, but I'm not sure that that's entirely possible. And then, I look, ahead at the schedule, right? I believe they have in the next month and a half plus, they have 5 home games, and I want to say somewhere in the range of like 14 road games. So 5 of 9, let's say 5 out of 19 roughly are on the road against some real tough opponents too, right? So they have a lot of Coachella Valley ahead of them, the first place team in the league. They have, Abbotsford, a real solid club. They go out to Texas, in March. But then again, then they kind of surprised me. Then they did go play a game like this, last Friday against Calgary.
Yeah,
a little bit of a depleted team, and then shut them out 3-0. Miami makes 30, I want to say
37
saves, and they look like, okay, this is a team, right? Like, I mean, I was joking around with somebody, but not like, I think we kind of got a good barometer, maybe or a good sign of things to come with this Barracuda team. When you look at opening weekend, they played Rockford, they lost 7-2 and they won 7-2. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
High team where, some nights they look like they have it, and then other nights they look like they've never played a game together. And it's part of that. It's just this league is a young league, and players will tell you. I mean, and certainly scouts and GMs will tell you. And time and time again, the hardest thing to build in this league is consistency, both because of just the youth, and also just the lineup changes and schedule and everything. So. That's something that really, I think, has eluded this team a lot for a good chunk of this season, and that's why they find themselves where they are in the standings.
I also want to ask you about the defense in a sense of going back to the original thing I said early on, that it's always hard, I think, to evaluate how good your players are compared to other AHL players. And so the Sharks sent down Shimmick and Knizhov, and I think it's easy to look at, these guys have played a lot of AHL games, they're going to dominate down there in the AHL. And that's not the case. And so from what you've seen of these two veteran players, how good are they in the AHL?
Yeah, this is something where it's difficult, because ideally the NHL and its teams would love the AHL to completely mimic what they're trying to do, what they do in the NHL. But the AHL in a lot of ways is a much different game. It's a lot more scrambly. The schedule is markedly different, just in the sense that you see mostly the same, let's say 10 to 15 opponents all year, if in some cases fewer than that. So like you don't catch teams by surprise as much, by mid-season, the pre-scout is kind of like, okay, well, we've already played these guys 7 times, so it's much more scrambly, and I find a lot that a lot of times, like, players come from the NHL where it's very structured, very kind of like in some ways almost like paint by numbers, and like you do what you have to do, and everyone else is going to do their job, and everything's going to go smoothly. Whereas like down in the AHL, it's chaotic a lot of times, and so players that really thrive on that structure of the NHL definitely can come to the AHL and struggle. And I don't think that's uncommon at all. Like, the 2 players you mentioned, I see it quite a bit, across the league, where you see that, players you've had some success up top, in one way or another, and certainly are players, at least on paper, you would expect to come in and handle things pretty easily, instead find themselves sometimes struggling down at this level.
And also related to the defense too, wanted to ask if you have any perspective on what I found to be a really curious decision for the Barracuda to start the season with 3 young goalies, one injury prone, like you mentioned with Makiniemi. They had a veteran like Arundel that in theory they could have signed, that literally was helping out Logan Couture in his rehab, just hanging around San Jose for quite a while. And so it just seems like such an odd and curious decision. Also, speaking to your point of needing one of these guys to take the bull by the horns. I was at that Barracuda game last Friday where they shut out the Wranglers, and I spoke with John McCarthy after the game, and he said that a couple weeks ago they had talked to those 3 young goalies, Makiniemi, Krona, and Romanov, and said, "Hey, we need one of you guys to kind of take the bull by the horns and take charge, kind of that's what they're really looking for them to make a run." And obviously Makiniemi got off to a good start in that regard, 2 wins in a row, including that shutout. But anyway, it all speaks though to, I mean, to have to talk to your goalies mid-season like that, that's usually not a good sign. Because that means that no one has kind of taken charge yet. And anyway, just any perspective on why the Barracuda decided to kind of roll to go that way, in which we can see, I think it's hurting them in the standings, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it was a strange decision, I thought. Even I'm not trying to hindsight 2020 this, but
sure.
But yeah, you had a guy like Arundel who certainly he's that number 1 guy, like that number 3, if you will,
yeah,
in the NHL depth chart. Like he fits that to a T. A guy that can certainly, he's had his time in the NHL. He can go up pretty easily without a problem. And when he's in the AHL, he can be a dependable number 1. And you're rolling the dice there with a guy like Makiniemi, who's had his his injury issues, and then you had a guy like Corona coming from college, University of Denver last year, and then you had Romanov, who coming over from the KHL, and that's off.
Not even the VHL.
Oh, the VHL, I should say. And I guess in theory it seems good to be like, okay, well, we'll have this competition and we'll sort of let everybody fight for playing time. But what happens when kind of nobody, like you said with McCarthy, nobody takes the bull by the horns? Then what, right? Then you're kind of, well, you're exactly where the Barracuda are right now. Where you're kind of, everyone's looking around waiting for somebody else to do something. And that's why, like, you look in Ontario, they went out, they got Arundel and come into the play there, right? So now you're going to see him, like kind of salt in the wound for the Barracuda. And because, there's an injury obviously up top with Copley. He's hurt, so Rittich goes up. Rittich, another good example of a guy that can be the number 3 on your depth chart and kind of be that glue between the NHL and the AHL club. And I've seen teams like I joke, but I don't. It's almost like teams try to sort of like outwit the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the system always wins, right? Like it's like the house always wins, and like, you always think, okay, maybe we can get by with, with this, alternative, we don't need a true number 3. And then inevitably you always do, right? And so, it's, there were some good goalies too on the market this summer, who fit that bill, and, Dell certainly being one of them. And, I'm not privy to kind of why things unfolded the way they did, but, I felt like, like he's right there, and, he would have been perfect for this club.
And obviously, we're not saying that Arundel is the reason why the Barracuda are where they are. There's plenty of goalies that they could have signed. Actually, this was their opportunity to bring back Martin Jones. That would have been fun, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so there's all sorts of options, and you can even sometimes go the European path. Some of those, like I look at Florida, they brought in Ludwig Weber, and he was a Swiss guy, and guy who had some success over there. Comes over at like 27. He's been okay. Helped Spencer Knight there, along with the Charlotte Checkers, and kind of again a guy that can step in when needed to help your prospect, and when is also able to step back, right? And so it's asking essentially a rookie a player that was in the VHL last season and somebody who's been battling injuries to kind of come in and hold down the reins for a team in front of them that has its own issues. Obviously a defensive forward, I think maybe was asking a little too much.
Yeah. On to some better news. The offense is pretty good. I mean, they're third in the Pacific Division for goals for. Much better spot than they are in their defense. What's gone right with them so far, even though they lost like a huge piece in William Eklund for the whole year that they had last year?
Yeah, well, I think Nathan Todd's been kind of back to his self. Like he was a player that, he battled some injuries last season. He was in the St. Louis system. And he was a player that like he'd come kind of like he really kind of broken through in the pandemic year, but that was kind of a watered down year in the AHL, so it was really tough to kind of get a sense. Okay, what kind of player is he really? Well, he's come in and been a nice addition, I think. Cole Castles, he's not going to put up a ton of points necessarily, but he is one of those good glue guys, right? Like a good dependable veteran. Like he was in Belleville and Cleveland, and I talked to both coaching staffs there about him over the years. They always constantly raved about him. Just a guy you throw over the boards there in the last minute of the game. He can hold a lead for you, or you can put him out there. He can maybe help you get a tying goal. Like someone just real coach's favorite, like somebody that can really depend on. There's been some signs. The thing I do like scoring wise for the Barracuda, it has been fairly evenly distributed. It hasn't been one or two guys kind of carrying everything. I think all things considered, considering what's the losses in terms of the roster, like losing Carpenter, losing Bailey early, obviously Lindblom's is going out of the lineup. I think there's been some positive development there in terms of some of your kind of distributing that scoring across the lineup. So, and I don't mean to paint like a dire picture, for Barracuda fans. I mean, what this team is going through is not all that unusual around the league. I mean, you can probably pull, let's say 6 to 8 teams around this league that are going through some of the same issues that the Barracuda are, maybe even more than that. And, I think, with a couple, changes of fortune, this is a team that could certainly, get themselves into a playoff spot by the end of the year. But, it is also, again, it's a team where probably everything's going to have to kind of fall just right for them as well.
I wonder too, to kind of, I guess, maybe wrap up a little bit in terms of just the totality of the team and also the coaching a little bit too. I think we answered sort of how good is this Barracuda team, and like you mentioned, in your opinion, everything had to break for them to even be, I guess, even a fringe kind of a playoff team. But how is the team competing? Because I think that's a bit that I look at when you look at how John McCarthy is doing. What kind of team does he have? How is he developing? And the team that he does have, are they competing, you think?
Yeah, this Barracuda team, I just, these are kind of the teams that are the hardest to diagnose, I feel like, right? Because there's not necessarily one thing where you can definitely point at and be like, okay, all right, this is the problem. Fix this and you'll be good, right? Like it's a little bit of everything. In that regard, it's a challenge. It's a challenging group, right? And like, I don't want to put too negative a light on it. I also don't want to kind of paint over things either. Like, there are, this is part and parcel though of really just an operation across the board, NHL down to the AHL. And I always say the NHL team's problems or successes eventually become the AHL team's problems or successes. And, with the NHL team obviously going through their adjustment and their rebuild and their struggles, it's not that surprising that, there's going to be some, growing pains down at the AHL level as well.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for your time. We've got a couple more questions for you, if that's okay with your time.
Absolutely. No
Okay,
problem.
great.
This is actually they're going to be quick hitters, and then we'll get out of
Okay.
here. But you get one Barracuda player. Who's your favorite Barracuda player to watch? Like, if you could pick one.
Mukhamadullin, I think. Yeah,
Mukhamadullin?
Just a dynamic player. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, about Mukhamadullin, because we talked a little bit about it, but is it, I guess, how impressive is it that he's, this young and doing so well in the AHL?
Well, I think, the fact he comes in is just, like, he's confident, right? Like, he pushes the play, and that's the thing I look for with young defensemen, especially. Like, do they have that poise? Are they a common influence out there, or are they kind of like you put them out there and it's chaotic? Mm-hmm. And he's someone that he has that composure. And again, he's young, and there's going to be mistakes, and like even your best defensemen that come through this league on the way to the a good NHL career have had their struggles, but he's fun to watch, and I think the Sharks have a good one in him.
Yeah, love it. And then it kind of goes with that. Any other like possible future NHLers from this prospect group? I know there's some. We've had a few disappointing players from the past few drafts kind of linger around the Barracuda, but anybody that you could think of besides Mukhamadullin, because we all know he's going to make it.
Yeah, well, I never like to write off players too early, and I really it's a habit I tried to really break, because I've been proven wrong enough times where you think, okay, that guy, and then something like the switch goes on, or maybe get a different development coach or a different team. But I think Gushchin, I think there's a player there for the NHL club. I think Bordelot should eventually he should pull through. And Gavanka is an interesting. He's an interesting one. I do think there's NHL talent there. It's just a matter, can he kind of harness it all at the NHL level, right? And kind of do what he does successfully down here, but also be able to do what you need to do at the NHL level, where obviously he's not going to be able to contribute as much offensively. So I think there's some talent there. I mean, it's a developing young group, right? There's definitely some tough nights as we've seen, but I do think there is something for Sharks and Barracuda fans to feel positive about.
And a last one for me here. We've talked a lot about John McCarthy, and I think it's easy a lot of times to look at the guy that you see on the bench, the guy that's face front with everything, and say, what is he doing wrong? Fire this guy or whatever, right? But I wonder though, if you look at the Barracuda, they haven't been very competitive for a number of years. And this is not just to say it's on one guy, but it's also tied into the development prospects, right? And maybe those guys coming along aren't that remarkable either. But what do you think of what Joe Will has done over the years here? He's been the GM of this team for quite a while here, and we talk about the roster maybe not being the greatest roster, and that a lot of it is probably on the GM. Though of course the flip side of that is that we don't know what Mike Greer wants from Joe Will from his Barracuda team, so that is also part and parcel with it. But just in general, what do you think of the job that Joe has done? What's he done well? What can he improve?
Yeah, I mean, it's again it's sort of to bring this full circle of kind of what you pointed out, that it depends on what are the NHL club's priorities, like what do they view the AHL club as a vehicle for? Is it strictly develop? Is it developed to win? Some teams really it's mostly about winning, because it just depends too, like where you are in your kind of your prospect cycle. Like if you've already graduated a bunch of guys and you're kind of replenishing the system, it might take a couple years. So you're like, all right, well, this is maybe more going to be a time where we're going to sign a bunch of vets and we're just going to try to win for a couple years, and until we restock the system with picks. And Vegas wasn't that exactly, because obviously they're an expansion team, but their first couple of years with Chicago, for example, they were all about winning there, right? Because they didn't really have any picks to put in the system, so there's not a whole lot of development to do. So you see some cases like that. So And one thing that is, I think, maybe something that can be a challenge. I have heard some players mention things, at different points, like it's a expensive place to live, the Bay Area, obviously. Like, and you're trying to get by on a AHL salary in some cases, like it can be tough, right? Like if you're looking at your two offers, you're like, well, the money is roughly the same, but I'm going to go play in Wilkes-Barre. Well, that money's going to go a lot further than if you're going to play in San Jose, right? Like, and your rent's going to be 2 times, 3 times, whatever it might be, right? Like, so, it's those little sort of those challenges that I think you'll see maybe a GM run into. And so I think with Will, like I think he's done a respectable job. I don't, I think considering that the team is, obviously there's been a huge amount of transition through the Sharks operation the last several years, and he's just one part of that whole operation. He doesn't,
Sure.
He doesn't just wave magic wand and issue orders. Like, so he's he has a boss or several bosses to answer to, and so yeah, no, I think he's done okay, but I think the next few years will be really critical for the Sharks and the Barracuda as a whole, like to really start to establish some of that groundwork for a good, development culture, and a place where every year you can start to churn out 3 or 4 players for the NHL club.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for joining
Absolutely.
us. It's been enlightening to hear a little bit about from the Barracuda from outside, like Sheng was saying, because we get a lot of Sharks voices and a lot of fans, but people on the outside we'd like to know from too.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Anytime.
Yep. Thanks so much, Patrick. I'll see you this weekend in San Jose.
Perfect. Sounds good. All right. Take care, guys. All right.
So we spoke with Patrick about the Barracuda, which you guys have now hopefully watched all the way through. Pretty lengthy discussion. Let's talk a little bit about what are the people saying? What are the people that you hear from talking about the Barracuda? And I don't want to bring up, dig up old news, but there was also that summer story about the fighting and the Martin Kaut situation.
Sure.
And now,
also JD's thing on Locked On Sharks about how the players were being treated.
Yep, absolutely. It was a great episode. And also the wives and girlfriends thing and how they're being treated.
Sure.
What's going on with the Barracuda? What's the scuttle?
So as I mentioned with the Mukhamadullin thing, you talk with people outside, and if everyone tells you the same thing, then good. Then you have a pretty you can say pretty comfortably one way or another what's
Sure.
going on with the player, organization, or whatever, right? I also mentioned this a lot with Mario Ferraro, that I hear different things from different people, and so that's what makes me unsure about his trade value. And so the Barracuda, I reached out to a lot of people, and my question to everybody was really just about the Barracuda team this year. Why are the Barracuda so bad? That's all what I asked. That's what I asked everybody, and I got back a lot of different answers though, and not everything was related to the team this year. And just sticking with what Patrick talked about and how he sees it isn't really any different than how other people see it, other scouts, executives, that this Barracuda team isn't a very good team. Not even at its best on paper, despite the number of kind of name veterans that you might recognize compared to other AHL teams, they're not that good. And so just get that out of the way. A lot of questions about why they started a goaltending their season with 3 unproven goalies, 3 unproven at the AHL goalies, which Patrick alluded to. And that's what I heard back from everybody. It's a different goalie every time we play them was what one guy told me. So I think there's a lot of questions about that decision from Mike Greer, from Joe Will, whoever kind of made that decision to roll the start the season out with 3 unproven guys, and your most proven guy is a guy that can't stay healthy. So a lot of questions about that. And I also want to preface this too by saying that I'm still digging on this stuff. A lot of stuff like is too much for an episode. If I really pull the string on it, it's too much for this episode because we're already going to be at, what is this, like close to the 2 hour mark or something, or hour 30 mark. So
something like that.
So it's too much for this one episode, but it's something that I'll pull on a bit more over the next few months or so. But anyway, so first I want to talk about John. I want to talk about three different elements, three different things about the Barracuda or Sharks organization. First, John McCarthy. Should John McCarthy be fired and all that kind of stuff? I know that's sort of the talk now, right? And I people do tell me that even though they think that he is a good man and a good coach, like that is unanimous, but maybe, and I alluded to it in a conversation with Patrick, that maybe they could have hired somebody veteran to kind of mentor, to be associate coach or something, to be there with a John McCarthy, who had no head coaching experience before this job, right? Obviously, his playing career ended kind of out of nowhere, right, with unfortunate health with the stroke, right, a couple of years ago. And so anyway, he's a guy that didn't have a lot of head coaching reps before he got here. And so it was suggested to me that maybe he could have been he could have been a position coach for a couple of years, and before his first head coaching job. And when he gets a head coaching job, then surround him with a veteran staff or better veteran players. And so anyway, that's a consistent thing, that the veteran part that we talked with Patrick a little bit and with other people, that they are lacking in veteran leadership, not just among the players and not just among having enough high-end veteran AHL players like a Ryan Carpenter, who's not with them right now, of course, but also too the coaching staff maybe could benefit or could have benefited from that. Now McCarthy is a year and a half in, so maybe he's got those reps a little bit right now, but definitely last season though, and we heard about, like I alluded to, McCarthy talking about the team not being as together. Maybe having a little bit more of a veteran compliment there could have helped him in that way. So anyway, it's not clear cut on McCarthy. Like, it's, again, these are things I'm still digging on. So I didn't get across the board like, yeah, you got to can this guy, he's a terrible coach. That's not what I hear. So
yeah.
Someone pointed out Joe Will, and Joe Will's the GM of the Barracuda, and he's been the GM of the Barracuda for quite a while. I think since before they moved over, or maybe a little after they moved over, around that time range. Anyway, he's not constructed strong Barracuda teams for a number of years, the last four years or so. And so if you look at a decision to start the season with 3 unproven goalies, is that on his doorstep? I don't know. But anyway, so that's what one person kind of pointed out, that there hasn't been a track record of success there. And then also you look at some of the stories that you heard about just how players are being treated. As much as we did an episode about it, and then we said, well, maybe it's not quite as extreme as some people are saying, and I don't think it is. But nonetheless, though, we said in this episode that they could be better. And Joel is the GM of the team, and so he is sort of the head of he could spearhead the being better part, and it sounds like he didn't necessarily do that last year. And then
Patrick,
finally,
before we get to the final, Patrick also mentioned in the interview, talking about just the cost of the Bay Area for these kind of players, because AHL salaries are not NHL salaries by any means. Of course, So attracting players to the Bay Area to play for the Barracuda specifically may be a tough challenge for Joe Will that people haven't really appreciated before.
Maybe. But then in that case, though, someone's got to figure out on the Cuda or Sharks that I'm not saying just Joe, but someone's got to figure out, like, okay, we cannot pay this like, we cannot pay salaries that are necessarily the most tenable for living in the area.
Sure.
Even though the AHL has no salary cap, but yeah, you can't pay players a ridiculous amount, right? But you can treat players amazing. Like, there's no budget on that, right?
Sure.
So things like that, right? So there are things that, like, I guess what I'm saying is that, like, if you're in the Bay Area and maybe there is some degree of disadvantage because there is not a value to living here for families and whatnot, right? Then it should never be a question then how you're treated, like the
Yeah.
perks. And that's what tech companies out here do, right? If you look up like the perks of working at a Google or a Facebook or Meta or whatever, right? They're, they're amazing compared to like working at John Deere or something like that.
Yeah.
So I guess the point is you can compensate for some of that by treating players and wives so well that you never hear a story or a podcast suggesting that you're just treating them average or bad or whatever. And so that's the thought. And that, again, that's not all on Joe Will, and that leads to kind of the last thing, right? And so I talked with someone else about why the Barracuda are bad this year, and he said the problem's even higher up the chain, and it's with the Sharks.
The whole thing.
And yeah, the whole thing. And so he said that a lot of unqualified people are making decisions in our game today without really adding much to it. And so that's a conversation that I need to pull at the string more. And obviously, the guy you think about is Mike Greer, who came in with no GM, no AGM experience. Maybe he's also talking about someone else or other people in the Sharks organization. And I've also heard good things about Mike too. So I don't want to throw Mike entirely under a bus. And same thing with Joe Will. I don't want to throw Joe Will entirely under a bus. I've heard good things about Joe Will too. But anyway, though, the overall point though is that there's a lot more to this story. Be it John McCarthy, be it a Joe Will, be it a Mike Greer. I think there are questions, and that is my mom in the background. So hi, Mom. There are questions about all these guys. I need to kind of dig on more. There wasn't just one sort of consistent narrative, though. Well, the one narrative was that the Barracuda are a bad team.
They are a bad team
on paper.
Yeah.
It's so it's not like this. It's not like this was a Calder Cup contender that is 10 points out of the playoffs right now. So anyway,
perfect.
So I think I think this is a good wrap up.
I think she's trying to tell you that you got to get out of here.
She's telling me I gotta go catch my flight back to LA. So
yeah, you've been ousted.
Yeah, I'm getting.
I think this is a great ending to the show.
This is a good ending for an episode. So
I'm really excited about this. We'll talk about the Barracuda more. We're doing a little bit of digging now, but I think we'll have another episode later on in the year, maybe in the off season, about what to do with the Barracuda.
Yeah, and if you have any questions about it, actually, to tease our episode next week, it's a bye week, so we're going to have a mailbag episode. So if you have some questions, look for. I'm going to ask you to drop your questions in the comments of an article soon, and so that's a place to put them. And so we'll answer some of those next week.
We may or may not have an in-person attendance of the Bean Pod as well to talk about as well. Somebody might be doing a little bit of reporting on the Bean Pod and Will Smith. Maybe. I don't know.
It might be kicking with with Will Smith and future Shark Macklin Celebrini.
It's probably this guy. Anyway, all right, guys. We'll talk to you later on. Bye.
Bye.